Welcome back to another episode of the Dairy Podcast Show. Today, I'm very excited to be welcoming as a guest Dr. Mark McGuire. Dr. McGuire is the director of the Idaho Agricultural Experiment Station, and he's an associate dean in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at the University of Idaho. Mark's a professor who studies nutrition, milk synthesis, and the role of animal products in the human diet, and somewhat uniquely does lactation studies in both dairy cattle and in women. And so, Dr. McGuire, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Barry. Appreciate having the opportunity to join you.
So, Mark, I think it's always interesting to find out about people's background, how they ended up working in dairy. Could you tell me a little bit about your history and how you ended up in this role?
Sure. So my interest in dairy, I grew up in northern Illinois, and most of our neighbors were dairy producers when I was a kid, and we did beef and pigs mostly, and so I'd go enjoy the opportunity to milk a cow and see the differences between dairy cows and beef cows as far as lactation goes. Milking those occasional beef cows to see how they were doing was always a challenge, but certainly production limits were quite different. And when I went to University of Illinois as an undergrad, I was started out in animal science, and let's just say the animal science there was a fairly large department, and I didn't really have good relationships with any advisors or faculty, and just happened to have a friend who was a couple of years ahead of me in the dorm room, as well as and he was studying dairy science, and that's Paul Van Raden, who is a geneticist at USDA in Beltsville, and we were in high school together. So Paul kind of drug me along to dairy club meetings, and I started to meet the faculty like Jimmy Clark, Jim Robinson, Bruce Larson, and really just said, these are people that care about students. Now, in that day, it was 450 undergraduates in animal science, and I think there were 8 in dairy science. So it was more of a one-on-one approach with the faculty that you felt appreciated. And so with Paul's introduction, I became more comfortable in the dairy science department, and essentially took the same classes in both cases. So I switched over to dairy science and enjoyed long-term relationships with faculty that have mentored me over my life. There's not too many opportunities to spend time with people like Jimmy Clark and Jim Robinson in particular. Jim Robinson ended up, I think I was his only undergraduate advisee in his career, and it was great. Somebody who's looking at genetic factors that affect embryo development, the dumps calf. I mean, that was Jim Robinson, and I just enjoyed that science, and that science led me to graduate school, and again, connections from those faculty to faculty that had graduate student openings. And that was Bob Collier at that point at Florida, and so it's a tight-knit community in the dairy world, and I think that's what I appreciated more than anything else.
So I have to ask a few things. Did I hear you right that Paul Van Raden and you went to the same high school?
Well, we shared ag programs. The two towns were 7 miles apart, and Paul was president of the FFA for 2 years before I was the president of the FFA for 2 years, and then he was in the same dorm as I was at Illinois, and so we've had a long-standing relationship over the years. In fact, I helped him and his family show dairy heifers at county fairs for quite a few years.
That's pretty neat. And then I didn't really think about this connection until you mentioned it, but so you worked with Bob Collier for your first part of your graduate work, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I went to the University of Florida, and Bob had a USDA BARD grant on heat stress. He and Dave Beatty, and I started off working at Florida with Bob, and Bob left in the middle of my program to go head up the BST program in Monsanto, so I finished my master's with Dave Beatty.
And now he's, of course, a colleague of yours at Idaho after you guys both went different directions for a number of years. So that's amazing.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to find him in a moment of weakness in retirement from when he was department head in Arizona. And he said, "Yeah, I still have a few years left. I'd like to do something. I'd be happy to look at Idaho." So yeah, I get to see him every day.
So take a minute, if you don't mind, and explain to me what an ag experiment station is for people that don't know, and what does it mean to direct a facility like or a system like that?
Yeah. So as director of the experiment station, I oversee all the hatch dollars that come to the station, if you will, which is the University of Idaho College of Ag and Life Sciences. And those funds then are coupled with a match from the state. And they are the operations, the personnel, the capital equipment that are our research and extension centers that allow faculty to go and do studies on dairy cows, on potatoes, as well as early childhood education and or early childhood development. So quite a range. And so it gives me the opportunity to work closely with USDA NIFA because our funds come through the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And I've also become active in the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, or APLU, because of my role as an experiment station section director. And so I get to go to DC once in a while and play politics to try to increase the amount of funding that goes to both the capacity funds, that would be what's given to the experiment stations, and then the competitive funds such as the AFRI funds that we all compete for.
Correct. Okay. Very good. Thank you. So for dairy professionals around the country, around the world, I think one thing that's interesting, you've been at the University of Idaho for quite a number of years now, and I guess largely during that time, you can take credit if you want, the dairy industry in Idaho has grown pretty dramatically. And I wonder if you just kind of give us an overview of that period of time and how much growth there's been.
Sure. I arrived in Idaho in 1995, so I am now one of the old dogs at the university experience. When I arrived, the dairy industry, I think we were 12th in the country with 275,000 cows. And that growth has been steady for the entire time, and there is still growth going on. We're right now over 600,000 cows and number 3 in the country. It's been just incredible to watch the growth. I mean, one of the difficulties we have at the University of Idaho is I'm in Moscow. Moscow's up north. We're about 300 miles away from the Magic Valley where all the cows are, but that doesn't mean I don't know what the dairy industry does. I get down there regularly. I did so when I was a young faculty member because I understood where the dairy industry was. But the size of the herds, the average herd size is somewhere around 1,500 cows, and you're seeing facilities built now with 30, 40,000 cows on site, cross-vet barns, high tech as much as you can find anywhere. And then coupled with that is amazing processing capacity. So cheese plants that are just 10 million pounds of milk a day, selling the 500-pound blocks. And then, of course, Chobani has a large, I think it's the largest Greek yogurt plant in the world, and it's not even near capacity in their production. So it's just an incredible industry, and part of that is because it's a great environment. The heat is relatively modest. We're at elevation from Boise of about 2,500 feet above sea level over to the Magic Valley and maybe about 3,000, and then higher on the east side of the state. And what that allows is that it may get over 100 during the day, but every night it cools off into the 50s or 60s, and it's a desert, so very low to no humidity, and so gives you an opportunity to produce milk, and then coupled with high quality feed that's produced, whether it be alfalfa or corn silage, it's just a tremendous environment.
Are there any particular challenges of dairying in Idaho?
Oh, I'm sure just like everywhere else, there's always challenges. Probably our biggest challenge is always water. We live off of irrigation, and so it's the snowpack and what the reservoirs have, and that could be fairly um, regional, the impact. So it could be that one irrigation district is a little short of water. That might impact a few dairies, or it could be a different one. And so, crop production here requires that irrigation, whether it be groundwater or surface water, and um, always concerns tied to that availability.
Okay. What is the feel right now in the state in terms of whether the dairy industry is going to be continuing to grow there the next 10 years, or does it seem like more of a plateau?
I always think that there's a potential to grow. It's going to be producers deciding to change what they might be growing, either for dairy feed or for use of water. And so it's really, are you prognosticating water shortages in the future or limits, and so I think we'll grow some, but I think we're getting close to capacity. That being said, I think people have been saying that since we were about 350,000 cows. So maybe I didn't say it, but others have. I just keep I'm always amazed at the ability of the dairy industry to find more opportunity. We had a real limit on our processing capacity, and what has happened is that producers, they decided we're going to do our own processing, and so we have milk protein concentrates, we have powder plants, we have additional cheese plants, and even expansion on the fluid market capacity that has occurred because the producers have decided that they wanted to control their own destiny by taking that milk and processing it. And of course, that allows that vertical integration, which I think helps support the industry's success.
That's impressive. Well, one of the exciting things going on in the state, and I know the producers in the state have supported this, is the new cafe facility. And we've been hearing more about this as some pieces have fallen into place, and I'm excited to talk with you about it today. So can you start just kind of explaining what this facility, what this vision is?
Sure. So we've been working on cafe. I think this is 1997 was the first effort. So this has been a big week in my life because Tuesday, the land board actually moved 23.25 million towards the project on top of all the other funding that we have. So we will be actively building a dairy in Minidoka County in the Magic Valley for research, teaching, and outreach purposes. CAFE is the term for the Center for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment. It really is a three-part entity of a research dairy, as well as an outreach, teaching, education center in Jerome, and then partnering with the College of Southern Idaho for workforce development in food processing. So the first step, though, is a research dairy. And so this week, the land board decided to invest some proceeds from a former research center that they sold last November that was landlocked housing developments in Caldwell, where they sold that 280 acres for 23.25 million. And as the college is the beneficiary of that endowment, we took forth an effort to convince the land board that for the best use of those funds for the beneficiary was to invest in a research dairy, and so they agreed to that, which I'm still can't believe it. It's been a long, I think as our president said to the land board, it's been a long and winding road to get to this point. And so they're going to purchase 640 acres of land that we have in north of Rupert in Minidoka County. That we partnered with the Idaho Dairymen's Association to purchase. We own two pivots. The university owns two pivots, and Idaho Dairymen own the other two. The dairymen are donating those two pivots to us, and then the land board, the endowment, the college endowment will purchase that land. then the funds that we generate from the sale of that land, plus the sale of the former R&E center, will be used to build a dairy. And we have the design went out to bid a few months ago, but sadly, the price tag came back well above what the funds were that we had in hand. So at this point, we said, no, we can't do this construction, but now we have the funds available. We're going to go back out to bid in January. We believe that the construction costs are coming down maybe a little bit. At least we've heard that the concrete costs are down dramatically. We know diesel costs are down, so excavation was a large part of those costs. So we're moving forward with the bids in January, hopefully to move dirt in early March or April for that facility. We're going to be milking in the end. We have CAFO for 3,600 animal head, but I think we'll be milking about 2,000 cows on that facility. First step is a dry lot system where we're going to probably have capacity for about 1,200 cows initially on the dry lots. It may be oversized because what we're going to do is we're going to divide that up into smaller pens so we can look at air emissions in particular across replicated pens in that work. So pens of 60 cows is the design. Why 60 cows? It's because we have a De Laval 60 cow rotary that is what the milking system will be. And so we're working closely with USDA ARS scientists in Kimberly, Idaho, who do a lot of work on air emissions and dairies in Idaho and in the West in designing that facility so it can address the questions and concerns that the public has about air emissions from the dairy industry, as well as the cropland that's associated with it. So we're going to be looking at the fields next to the dairy and look at how application of manure or nutrients from manure as extracted into biochar or other components impact then the carbon emissions from the crop when the crops are actually grown as well. So it's a combination of a dairy as well as the agronomy piece that we're going to evaluate at this facility.
That's exciting. Yeah. And I think a lot of dairymen could commiserate on the challenges of pricing out a facility right now, but it's fantastic that you're still moving ahead, especially with this new investment. How did this vision come together? As you said, it's been many, many years in the making, but I'm having a hard time thinking of another facility where you really integrate sort of the environmental piece, the production piece, and even the dairy food side.
That's been a discussion that's been ongoing with the industry. So it's really been a partnership with them more or less telling us what we should do.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's just say that Idaho dairymen, like most dairymen, are not afraid to actually speak their mind. And it's been an effort to refine what exactly they're looking for and try to come up with a facility design and a programmatic design to really meet the needs. And so initially the needs are, because there's a lot of dry lot, open lot dairies in Idaho, we really need to address some of the questions about air emissions as the National Dairy Initiative towards net zero is pushed. And so how do you do that in a dry lot situation? I mean, there's very few people even trying to address that or even measure what those emissions are. And so that's the first focus. Second focus will be more how to reduce the entirety of carbon emissions across that agronomic piece that in total is the dairy production system. And so the industry has been guiding us well. And with passion,
that great.
These are what we need, and we'll help you get there.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad it's coming together. That's pretty exciting. So you've already laid out some of the research objectives and some of the big picture needs, and how that was pulled together. Give us some sort of, I'm sure you've been talking with the legislature and other people that are outside of dairy. What are some of the long-term visions about the impact? So what are you talking about how this impacts the industry in 20 or 30 years?
Hopefully the impact is pretty significant in 5 to 10 years, Barry, because I think the industry really needs some answers if they're going to achieve that net zero by 2050. Um, so first and foremost, we've designed the facility so it's more of a plug and play type of approach, particularly with regards to the waste system, so that you can come in and put in a digester or put in a centrifuge or put in a new manure handling system that might extract nutrients in a way that can compete with commercial fertilizer, if you will. So we're hoping that flexibility allows us to address a lot of technologies that come forward in the very near future. Um, the college happens to have a USDA Sustainable Ag Systems grant on developing a bioeconomy on dairy waste. And that $10 million grant is looking at a couple of different ways to capture those nutrients from dairy waste and evaluate their economic value relative to commercial fertilizer for the rotations that we have in Idaho that include not only corn silage and alfalfa, but potatoes, sugar beets, and cereals. So that work has been underway for 2 years, and now we'll actually have a facility where we can do that work. And expand from small field plots and greenhouse experiments to larger fields to really hopefully convince investors that this is a real business opportunity, and that at the end of the grant, we're hoping that we've generated new businesses that can be tied to a dairy and get great economic value. So the producer may actually generate more money from the waste from manure than they do from the milk, but we'll see how that goes.
That's pretty exciting. I like that. So scaling out a little bit, as someone who directs an agricultural experiment station, do you see ways that ag research as a whole needs to adapt or pivot to serve society better moving forward?
We're not real quick at pivoting or adapting. I mean, we're that classic example of a battleship or an aircraft carrier. We don't turn on a dime. It takes years to change. And I think the Cafe project really reflects that difficulty, because when I got here in 95, Idaho was about 60% of the cash receipts were crops. And now we're 60% livestock, and of which the dominant driver there is dairy. Yeah, the number one ag industry in Idaho is dairy by far. Everybody sees potatoes on our license plate. Well, potatoes are important, don't get me wrong, but dairy is about 3.5, 4 times the economic value to the state as potatoes. And so for us, over 27 years now, to finally have a facility to address it tells you the difficulty that experiment stations or universities have in pivoting or changing. And so we're always struggling with that. One of the other difficulty with ag experiment stations across the U.S. is that we typically are in old, antiquated facilities. And I think the experiment station directors in 2015 did an assessment of all of our inventory of buildings, and the average age of the buildings for our College of Ag research purposes are about 50 years old. You can't do high quality research. Well, you can, but it's a challenge to do them in those kind of buildings. And so we've been pushing at the federal level really a new initiative to invest in infrastructure for the ag experiment stations. Part of that is also that we've had flat funding, at least on the capacity funding, for years, on the order of 10 to 15 years, while in particular China has been investing 14 to 15% a year increases in their ag research. And so if we want to try to compete with China, we need to have greater funds appropriated from the federal government and state governments to support that research enterprise, as well as allow us to build new facilities that meet our needs. And of course, that's all money to a great extent. But hopefully those new facilities will also encourage students, undergraduate students, to look at an opportunity to go through training, get graduate degrees, and help with that research as well. There are some significant challenges that we have nationally in ag research to really be competitive, even though we're still the leader, by far still the leader. But there are other countries, particularly China, that are catching up at great pace. And I think if you look in the Journal of Dairy Science, boy, authorship on papers that are published these years, it's being, it used to be one or two from China. Now I'd hate to even guess it might be 10 to 20, 25% of those papers published are all coming from China. So
That's true. Yep.
The U.S. research is not making the impacts that it was in the past.
Fair enough. Well, I hope efforts like the cafe, help attract fresh blood, I guess, to this side. Particularly, I think it's good if we can attract people that don't have an ag background to come join the effort to make our systems better. So for somebody that's working in the dairy industry today, this may be a little bit of a tough question given what you work on day to day, but is there one high impact practice that you would encourage them to implement today and just being effective in their work or in the way they run their business?
Yeah, that's a really challenging question you're asking there, Barry. One practice, I'm going to maybe just talk about positive promotion. I think we are challenged because we have, if you will, niche products in the dairy industry, organic, natural, and there's a competition there that doesn't necessarily help us be successful in total. When we're producing a product that has an extremely high value to the human consumer across a range. And I'm going to point out, my wife and I have done work looking at the presence of Roundup in human milk. There was a big effort to try to ban Roundup because it's bad for everybody. In reality, we can't find Roundup in human milk, and yet there were entities that were trying to ban Roundup because of that fake news, if you will.
Okay.
And so we need to push that consuming dairy products is a great source of nutrients for everyone in the human consumer. I'm not going to push fluid. I'm not going to push cheese. I'm not going to push yogurt. It's really dairy products. I'm really worried about how all these plant-based beverages are challenging dairy food intake. So I think what we have to do as a dairy industry is just be together, be unified, talk about the value of these dairy products for the human consumer. It's the key that we have to do. So that's the one practice, that high impact practice, is being passionate about the products and the production that you have. So talk about the good things that the dairy industry does, such as producing the same amount of milk. Well, actually producing more milk from 9 million cows than we produced from 25 million cows 50 years ago. So, we are an industry that has demonstrated tremendous ability to be sustainable while producing a high quality nutrient source for the human consumer.
That's a solid answer. I like that. Okay, we've got 3 questions we ask of every guest to wrap up. So first one, what's your favorite dairy-related book or resource?
Yeah, but you're asking some good questions here, Barry. So my favorite dairy book, and it's one that I probably look at every day because it's sitting on my shelf right next door, and it's a series, actually. It's a series of books called Lactation, and these are it was a treatise of chapters that were put together by experts. The book was edited by Bruce Larson at Illinois, and because of my interactions with Bruce when I was an undergrad, I became, enthralled by those books, and certainly my master's degree with Bob Collier, who followed up with a different book on lactation, and then PhD with Dale Bauman at Cornell. I mean, lactation is my heart and soul. I think about milk. I think about milk synthesis. And these books were really, I think, the first ones that stimulated my scientific interest in why, some cows are tremendous at producing milk, and some should become McDonald's hamburgers.
Yeah.
And so that's probably my favorite dairy related book, and it's really just a lactation book per se.
Okay.
I also have right next to it the Large Herd Management Handbook. I appreciate those books too, but my real passion is understanding milk synthesis and how to affect it. So
Great. Okay. So what about your favorite book or resource outside of agriculture?
Yeah. So as I thought about that question, I would say that I like the classic good versus evil stories, and so I read Lord of the Rings. I think the movies are better because it was hard reading. So I'm going to go with The Stand by Stephen King. I think that is my favorite book. It's probably, as I think about it, I think it's the only book that I've reread a couple of times.
Okay.
So every 4, 5, 6 years, I think over a period of time, I reread it, and to me, it is a terrific story of good versus evil, and of course, good wins. So you like that, As I think about it as well, with living through a pandemic now, I might go back and read it with a different perspective of how did those people survive in that situation, and how did that impact them as they actually went through that pandemic, rather than just the good versus evil part of that story. So that's probably my favorite book. The other part of my non-science life is I like early human history, if you will.
Okay.
So the books like 1492 and the Jared Diamond's stories, and then being a McGuire, I started to try to chase down some of my Irish heritage, and how the Irish saved civilization and things like that. So all those books also are fun to read, and they really stimulate you to think a little differently about what's going on today. And I think that's part of, as you think about changing climate, I think about, as things thaw, they're uncovering a past civilization. They're uncovering, so man, and I don't mean that in any kind of derogatory way, man was living there, or animals were living there in the past. So it did change. And I think we just have to anticipate that we're going to be living in a changing world forever. And each of us as an individual, we just have this little short snapshot of time. Should we do stuff to become more environmentally friendly? I'm all about minimizing our impact, but I think the world will change. It will always change. And how we adapt to that change is ultimately, I think, how man will survive.
Great answer. So The Stand, I'm going to have to add that to my list. I haven't read that one. All right. Lastly, in your opinion, what sets successful dairy professionals apart from those that are less successful?
I'm going to go back to my answer about that one high impact factor, and I think it's passion. Passion for the industry, passion for people in the industry. It's individuals who engage to learn more, to help move the industry forward. And so it's passion.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Mark McGuire, thank you for joining us on the Dairy Podcast Show. I think that was an excellent conversation. I hope all our listeners enjoyed it. If you've not subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, and look forward to seeing you again next time.